Welcome to the Agile Talks again. And the same day, in the same time, we are here together to learn and to grow together. And today, I'm again very excited because we will discuss with Allen Holub. And I like his style, and his style is very different. And he is very popular on LinkedIn and also on Twitter. And we will discuss about his tweets, and we will discuss about agility, and we will discuss about some software topics. And let's invite him and learn together. Welcome, Alan.
Hello. Software guru, huh?
Yeah. I don't know what will I write because I tried to agile consultant software. I think you have lots of title: keynote speaker, software architecture.
Yeah.
But I wanted to put software group because we are always talking about the software, better software. And welcome to session, and thank you to accept my invitation. I want to start the simple question. This is the my the first question. Who is Alan?
Who am I?
Yeah.
that's,
Maybe
that's
hardest one. Yeah.
that's complicated. Well, the things that probably most of your viewers already know is architect, agile guy. I do a lot of classes. I started out life as a hardware engineer. I was building robots, and the back in the day we couldn't get a compiler for the chip that we were using. So I was tasked with creating a compiler for that chip. And then I did such a good job on that, they made me write an operating system. And by the time I got done with that, I was a software guy. So the and I've been in the business for a long time. Both, not just as a, sometimes on Twitter people say, "Oh, you're just a consultant," but I've spent most of my career actually programming. It's not like it's strictly a consultant. And I still actually take on an occasional programming job just to stay current. Of course, I'm always working on hobby projects, but the, that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about the agility. The simple question. Uh, Everybody is giving different answer for about this question.
Mhm.
So the question is, what do you think about agile, and what's agility from your perspective?
Well, Agile with a uppercase A has turned into kind of a cesspool. The word is being used to describe something that has got nothing to do with being agile in lowercase a sense. So it's kind of an issue, right? Is that in fact, a lot of your guests, at least a few of them, Jeff Sutherland, for example, is pushing that whole certificate thing, which I see as a negative. I think it takes away agility to have some kind of rigid process. So when I say agile, I actually mean the word agile that you can look up in a dictionary. It means that you're flexible and you're not necessarily fast, but certainly able to change direction easily and is able to accommodate changes. And that's the main thing. And anything you do to pull that off is fine with me. Is that I'm not going to push a specific way of working on anybody if you're getting results. So as long as you can be agile in the literal sense of the word, that's fine. I have no problems with that. So I don't much like any of the canned processes, because as soon as you can certificate a process, as soon as it's written down and you have to follow it point by point, you're not agile anymore. You're following a rigid process. So I don't like any of those. Some are worse than others. Safe is the worst, of course, but the safe isn't even slightly agile. But and even among the Scrum community, the Scrum Alliance kind of Scrum is a very rigid process that I really don't much like. The Scrum.org version of Scrum is better.
Mhm.
Um, the Certainly, I know a couple of Scrum.org trainers, and I respect them a lot. But they're training in Agile more than in Scrum, right? They're
Yeah.
saying, here's all this Agile stuff to do, and here's Scrum, and they talk about following the spirit instead of the letter of the Scrum guide, which it kind of makes me nervous, but because who knows what that means. But at least that seems more agile to me. Is that I don't have a problem with that. But in general, I don't like any of the canned processes. I don't think they work.
Okay. And also, let's continue with the third question. You
Okay.
said to they create their own way of working, and also they. Let's talk about that part. What do you think about the transformation and the steps about the transformation? Because lots of companies starting, okay, we want to transform, and when I hire the consultant about the transformation, okay, let's start with pilot scrum, or let's start with safe transformation.
You know, the transformation, I don't agree with transformation either. I hate that word because you're not,
Okay.
you know, you can't, people who talk about agile transformation want to use
Mhm.
a waterfall plan for transforming, right? They want to come up with a detailed plan. They want to set milestones. They want to, you know, have metrics. All it's just a dysfunctional waterfall thinking there. You can't become agile by
Mhm.
following a waterfall. It's not possible. So, and transformation also applies that you're transforming to something specific. And I don't see agile as something specific. It's a quality that you have. It's a characteristic you have, right? A cheetah is agile. It doesn't transform to agile, right? Is that it just is. It's part of its being, part of its personality. And you can't change the personality of an organization with a formal transformation. It's that you have to do that. How you do it depends on the company. Is that I do a lot of helping companies become more agile, but the process, if there is one, varies with every company. There isn't any standard approach, and usually I don't really even want to bring up the word agile. I want to think about business problems. I'll sit down with the CEO and I'll say, what's keeping you up at night, right? What are the biggest problems that you're having? And then we'll pick the most important of those and we'll solve it in the most agile and lean way possible. And
Mhm.
then we'll move on from there, just step by step. Well, in other words, if you're going to transform, and again, I hate that word, to agile, you've got to do it in an agile way, which means that you do something small and you release it and you get some feedback and you adjust and then you do the next thing. And that's the way to do it. And centering that around business problems is best. You don't even have to mention the word agile because what you're doing is helping the business. And I think that's best also. And the word agile has come to mean, again, Andy Hunt said it best. He said agile has come to mean do half of Scrum badly and use Jira, and that's true, right? And I detest that. And the whole idea of a formal transformation is that attitude is almost built into it, right? That it's the you're going to start now, and in a year you're going to be transformed into an agile organization. I have never seen that, and I also, it's also the person who's doing the transformation is almost always imposing their notion of what agile is on the company that they're working with, and I don't buy that either. Is that every
Mhm.
company is agile in a different way, and the things that there might be things that work for everybody but won't work for that company. And there
Hmm.
might, and the opposite also, of course, is that there are a lot of common practices that tend to work pretty universally. But um, it's got to be very specific with the people that you're working with, and it's also attitudinal. Is that if you're going to do any kind of transformation, the C levels have got to be on board, and so the first step is having a bunch of conversations with them. To try and make sure that a lot of people that do agile transformations, if you look at those organizations a year or two later, they're back where they started. And part of it is that if they really knew what they were getting into, they never would have started to begin with. Is they disagree so strongly with the kind of
Mhm.
basic ideas of how agile works that the way they want to do an agile transformation because they just played golf with somebody who told them that they ought to do it, and they don't really understand what they're talking about. So it's you got to start with conversation, and then you continue the conversation through the whole process. Is do a little bit, and is analyze and correct. You can't move too slowly, though, right? The other side of that is that if an organization moves too slowly, what happens is that they stall, and then they say, "Oh, we're stalled, so we have to go back to what we did before," and they start moving backwards.
Mhm.
So there's kind of a sweet spot of moving fast enough to get momentum but not moving so fast that the organization's in chaos. And so it's a gradual process, but it's not a formal one. I don't really like the idea of a formal agile transformation at all.
Yeah, I have two different question, but my sound is coming from back. Okay, now it's okay. I have two different question in that part. One
Mhm.
of them you said, yeah, the transformation is not project and we don't follow the step by step. But some companies are misunderstood this. They are saying, okay, we are in that transformation journey more than 8 years. We are in transformation in 8 years. We are in transformation.
How is that a transformation? If it's taking 8 years, they haven't transformed at all. It's that that's nonsensical. It's that those are companies that want to say they're agile, but they're not. They treat agile as a marketing thing, not a not a real thing. So I
The other topic is again the misunderstanding.
Mhm.
You said we need to start with talking with C levels and
Mhm.
to see the problems. But lots of time the problem is starting with that C level guys,
Could
because
be
for example they are pushing the teams, they are saying this is urgent, this is urgent, this is urgent,
right.
this is urgent, so they don't want to change, but they are saying okay, you need to transform, you need to be you need to do agile. What do you think about that? If we want to start with that C levels, how can we?
Well, you can start with the teams and move up, but it's difficult. It's a difficult approach. Is that
Mhm,
for one thing, the team is going to have to be fighting against the organization constantly in order to work in an agile way. So they're
mhm,
not going to get the support that they need. And the but it's reasonable if that's the only a choice to
mhm,
start with the team and then hope that other teams will look at them and go, oh gosh, what they're doing is working, maybe we should be doing that too, and have it gradually move its way up. But the other issue though is about what you just said is that the C levels are pushing in the way that you say, because again, there's a business problem and the only way they know how to address it is the way you just described.
mhm,
So if you can do a small experiment, if they say the problem we're having is we're not delivering fast enough,
mhm,
well, there are a couple of things that you can do that almost always fix that, right? Eliminating work in progress, so the teams are only working on one thing at a time, will almost always speed up the whole process. So you can say, well, let's try this little thing and see if people are delivering faster. We don't need it with the whole organization, just do it with the one team and let's see how fast they deliver if we make this one small change. And that brings people around, right? Because they see that you make these small changes and they have an impact, and they go, well, this is working, so let's try it on a broader scale, and that works okay also. Um,
mhm.
but the so anyway, bottom up works, but it's harder. I guess that's where I would leave that. Um, you need support,
Yeah.
and and all of the support organization, all the all of the support processes in an existing organization exists to support the current process, even if the current process is chaos. The right, the things that they do are set up to support that process. And if the process is going to change, the support infrastructure has to change, which means that the rest of the organization has to change. And when you haven't made those changes, it makes everything much harder because you're getting no support. So,
Okay, and I want to ask another question. Okay,
mhm.
lots of in sometimes problems are coming with agile coach, because lots of consulting is starting with the conversation with the C levels or the companies.
Yeah,
Okay, if you want to transform, you need to do that. So I think we need to start with agile coach to change the mindset, not directly to C levels, because if agile coach say, as you said, you need to find your pain points firstly, then you can choose your way of working. What do you think about that part? How can we improve or change the agile coach perspective? Lots of them, because as you know, they are following the frameworks.
yeah, and that's not going to work ever. To say, oh, you want to be agile, let's do Scrum. That never works. I have never seen that work. And the decision of how you work is the team's decision, right? The Agile Manifesto is pretty straightforward about that. When they say self-organizing, they literally means organize yourself. And part of organizing yourself is to decide how you're going to work. You know,
Mhm.
the one of the things that amuses me, right? Accidental humor in the Scrum Guide is the Scrum Guide describes this long process about how you um, should work, and then
Mhm.
it finally gets around to self-management. They don't use the word self-organizing, and I think that's a political thing because the word self-organizing scares people
Mhm.
that don't know what they're talking about, so they called it self-managing. But then they say, and that means that the team gets to decide how, when, and where they're going to, and where they're, how they're going to work, what they're going to work on, and when they're going to do it. And well, if you get to decide how you're going to work, then you're not going to be doing Scrum. So putting that in the middle of the Scrum Guide is kind of an interesting paradox that that they would even say that. But you can't decide how you're going to work unless you know something,
Mhm.
right? Because you have to be able to have a palette of tools to choose from. And
Mhm.
if a team knows everything, right, knows the options, knows the pluses and minuses, and then decides to do Scrum, that's fine. I
Mhm.
have no problems with that. But it's the team's decision. So if the whole organization is marching in lockstep, right, and you
Mhm.
see that all the teams have to do Scrum, and all of our sprints will start on Wednesday, and
Yeah.
and I've seen that a lot of times. That's not agile. How is that agile? There's no agility there at all, right? You're just rigidly following some canned process. And all too often, when people do agile transformations, they'll bring in some big consultancy like Deloitte or something, and that's what they end up with
Mhm.
some rigid process that was imposed on the entire organization by upper management. And that never works. It's never going to work. And if you look at a lot of those organizations, they'll spend millions on that. I wish they would spend millions on me, but they don't, right? They spend millions on Deloitte because for those same millions, I could do a much better job.
Yeah.
But the point is that what they're doing is not working. And the other problem with that approach is that they'll bring in an army of people that are going to make the organization do the change, but that's not the way to do it either. Is that people ask me about that when it's a larger company? They say, "Well, I assume you've got a team that you're going to bring in," and I go, "No." The first thing I do
Mhm.
is assemble a team from your people and teach them how to do things
Mhm.
because that way it's institutional knowledge is that things don't just go away when I do because I'm not going to be around forever, and it doesn't make any sense to bring in an army of trainers if they're just going to leave after the training is over because the institutional knowledge about how to make a change is gone at that point because they don't ever train on that. So the first step that I always do, as I said, is to form a team of people that can do the transformation. It works much better. So
Hmm. And yeah, my other question is about not team. This question is about the organizational level, the whole organization, the whole system.
mhm.
And lots of people are saying safe is not, how can I say, safe is not agile because safe is traditional way. Or some of
Yeah,
them, yeah, yeah, some of them are saying safe is suitable for the companies. What do you think about scaled agile framework and safe?
it's awful. There are no software businesses that I know of that use safe. Right? Facebook. You look at Facebook and Twitter and Netflix and all the big software people. None of them use safe because it's awful. And you look at companies that do adopt safe, and there's no agility, and it just doesn't work. I just the whole thing is appalling. We don't have time, but we could go through the Agile Manifesto and compare safe, and safe violates pretty much every one of the 12 principles. So there's no agility there. Safe is a money making scheme that was come up with by consultants in order to sell consulting services, and large corporations like it because they don't have to change much.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They adopt a new vocabulary, but they keep doing more or less what they were doing before, and they're happy. The control focused power hierarchy is still in place. The old divisions are still in place. There's no real change happening. So it's not going to work. And it's safe transitions take a long time because of my, put on my cynical person hat. I'm maybe too cynical than I should be, but the consultants make more money if it takes a long time to do the transformation. So they're going to milk that for every cent they can. And they don't care about the organizations, as the organizations aren't doing any better. So I just don't see it. It's not agile at all. It might be better than what the company is doing now, right? If the company is in complete chaos, at least doing safe is not chaotic. So you'll have a slight improvement. And who can argue with that? Is improving is better. But to imagine that you're being agile, that's a different issue entirely. Is that you're not improving in an agile direction. And that means that if you ever really decide that you want some agility in the organization, you're basically starting from scratch, because there's nothing in safe that gives you any agility. So it's, as I said, it's better than nothing, but it's a fad, right? The corporations that do it, it's a fad, just like all of the other fads, Lean Six Sigma and all of that stuff, right? Is it goes on for a few years and then everybody dumps it, goes back to what they did before. And I'm sure safe will do this exactly the same thing. Because it doesn't work, right? Just so people will eventually dump it. And I know of a lot of organizations that have spent millions doing a safe transformation, and 2 years later they've dropped the whole thing because it just wasn't working. So,
And there is coming some questions from our participants, and also I want to ask all of them, but let me start one by one. Okay, the first question, what's Agile? Each of us read and heard about Agile, but I would like to hear from expert. Can you tell us a short about this? Yeah, because some companies understand Agile wrong. I think you answered it, but maybe you can add
I can
some.
answer it quite shortly, actually. Is what Agile is to me is that you're doing something that aligns with the Agile Manifesto. And I'll say as a caveat there that the Agile Manifesto was written 20 years ago, so you have to adjust a little bit. So they talk about delivering monthly.
Yeah.
And nowadays, no, you're not going to do that. But the generally that's what it means. I have a list of heuristics on my website that you could look at also. It's on holub.com/HEU, for first three letters of heuristics. And that's a more practical approach, is that I've run it by a couple of people I know that are some of the original signers of the Agile Manifesto, and they kind of like it. Is that it's nice that everybody seems to be in agreement here. So I would look at those. At the risk of shameless self-promotion, I'm going to be doing a class that's a seminar where we will be discussing those on the 19th, I believe, about a week from now. So it's a week from yesterday. It'll be on Thursday. So if you want to do a class and you can, pungle up, get the approvals fast enough, there's a test of whether you're agile or not. Is that if you want to take a class, can you just take it, or do you have to go through a 4-month long approval process? But I've got the class going on. But we'll just be discussing the things that are in that heuristics list. So you could do that. But wrong, if you want to talk about doing agile wrong, if you're following a rigid plan, you're not agile. It's that simple.
Okay, that's a great one.
So there you go.
And the other question is about, in your model of agility, do you see the common Scrum roles? Yeah, I will ask that questions about the roles. Product owner, Scrum Master, yeah.
I'm not a Scrum fan, so I don't think much of any of that. If you have to have a Scrum Master, it means the team itself is not being self-organizing. They haven't learned how to manage themselves. So I don't see that as a particularly good role. The product owner also is, the product owner is often perverted into a boss, somebody who assigns stories to the team. And that's both not Scrum and anti-Agile. So if that's happening, that's bad. I do think there should be a product person on the team, somebody who has a understanding of the market as a whole, rather than the much narrower focus that the team will by necessity have. I think the major uh, responsibility of somebody like that is to arrange conversations between the actual team and the customers, not to serve as a intermediary where only the product manager talks to customers and then they talk to the team. I think it's a really bad idea. But the thing that I really dislike intensely about the product owner is that it's a single point of failure. It's one person that's making all the product decisions, and I don't like that. The Scrum Guide sneers at decision by committee, but decision made by a collaborative team that's working as a single unit, that's not a committee. Is that it's solving a non-existent problem in an agile world in a way that I really kind of don't like. Is I don't want a single point of failure. I want the decisions to be made collaboratively between a product manager and the team and the customers, all working together. So the Scrum, Scrum, there's not much to Scrum. When I think about Scrum, I characterize it with a quote from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's mostly harmless, but if done wrong, it can do harm, right? If people are doing it in a rigid way, it can be harmful. So, the Scrum role, I don't like hardly anything in Scrum. I'm writing a book right now called #No. And about things that go wrong, and one of the things that what I'll be addressing in that, among other things, are things like what I just said, is that what people do, if not wrong, at least can go wrong, right? Things that have problems, and in spite of the title, it's not going to be a book about just everything that's wrong. It's also going to be a book about how to fix that, how to do it better. But following a rigid process again is never going to get you anywhere.
And also, I want to ask one question about the product owner role. Lots of companies are using product owner role, but they are confusing about product owner business analyst. What do you think about that roles? Are they different role, or because in my experience, lots of company, you were business analyst, now you are product owner, but there is no responsibility.
They're different jobs. Right, a business analyst, at least traditionally, would effectively design the product up front. They would decide what the product had to look like, and then they would assign a set of tasks and things to build to the teams, and the teams built what they were told. Now, a lot of people that call themselves business analysts have evolved past that, but if it's a big company, that's probably still the way they define business analysts. So that's just a waterfall upfront plan. Again, there's no agility there. So the thing about business analysts also is that they are sometimes not focused on the customers. They are literally just focused on the business. And the agile focus is all on the customer, at least the customer's needs. It's not what I am not saying when I say that is that you build what the customer tells you, because that's not true. But what you do is sit down with the customer and figure out what their problems are. And it's your job as an agile developer, as a team, to come up with a solution to the customer's problems. And you do that by working with them collaboratively. And you do that since nobody knows whether the solution is going to be correct or not, you do that by building small and getting it into their hands and getting some feedback and adjusting. But it's the team's job to work collaboratively with customers to come up with solutions. It's the customer's job to be able to communicate their problems to the team so the team understands how to build a solution. And of course, sometimes you have to teach the customers how to do that. They don't know. But it's customer driven in that sense, is that we are driven by the needs of the customer. And I think that's important. And the traditional business analyst sometimes gets away from that, because they're not driving things. They're looking at, ROI and stuff like that, and not really looking at the needs of the customers themselves. And they hardly ever get enough feedback to verify whether the things they come up with are correct or not. And if they do get feedback, since the software doesn't exist, the odds of what they come up with being wrong are low. Right? I don't know how many times I've sat down with a customer and we've come up with this idea and we're all excited about it and go, this will be great. And then I build it and they're going, this is not as great as we thought it was going to be. So you want to minimize your losses by building small. And The business analyst approach doesn't support that. So I think they're very different jobs.
Okay, and the other question is about yeah, we talked about roles, we talked about team, and we
Mhm,
said team needs to choose their way of working.
mhm,
I have the other question is about the skills, and for example, if our company has a low skills about architecture, about
mhm.
product ownership, about development, and if we have high turnover, we cannot say what we think about that. So they are in that companies trying to they are spending lots of time to transform. So also they are saying we are in 6 year in that transformation.
Yeah, but that's not going to work. But if they have a lot of turnover, that's maybe the first thing to address.
Hmm.
Is that the one of the indicators that I have that you're succeeding is that if people don't like coming to work, they
Hmm.
don't work with a smile on their face, and they like the people that they're working with, and they're not exhausted, and all of that stuff. If that doesn't exist, there's no agility. The best indicator that you're doing agile right is that people are happy. So if you have a lot of turnover, that
Hmm.
means that people aren't. So that's an indicator that whatever you're doing in your transformation is not working,
Hmm.
because the
Hmm.
happiness goes up very quickly if you're doing things right. So that's an issue. The other issue is that putting skills into individual people silos is always a bad idea. An
Hmm.
agile team is not made up of a database guy and a tester and a UI guy and a developer or two and a front end guy and a back end guy. Because that's not the way it works, right? Is that you have overlapping skills. People might have a specialty, but they don't own that specialty. As other people on the team maybe aren't as good as they are, but they're good enough, right? The
Hmm.
whole bus factor issue. It should be possible for somebody to leave, and it shouldn't make a difference.
Hmm.
And the best way that I know to do that is mob or ensemble programming, is for everybody to work literally together.
Hmm.
One computer, one keyboard, and a whole team. And you can do that virtually or remotely just fine. It's not a problem. But that way, people will disseminate their knowledge out to the rest of the team just as a side effect of working. And kind of everybody learns about what everybody else is doing in the course of doing that. And it makes the knowledge diffuse out into the organization as a whole, so no one person becomes critical anymore. And mob programming is one of those things that people are scared of because it's so different than the way that they're normally working. But try it. It works really well.
Hmm.
Bring in somebody like me or Woody Zoll, whose team came up with mob programming, does in-house workshops all the time, and that's the horse's mouth. So you can hire Woody. But try it for a week and see what it's like. In the generally speaking, when I do a mob programming class, a workshop, everybody is suspicious when I walk in the door. They say, "Oh, this can't possibly work," and often by the end of the week, they're saying, "I can't imagine working any other way." So it doesn't take long to see the advantage. Excuse me, to see the advantages.
Hmm.
So
But yeah, some C levels we say in that part, yeah, to work with one computer and one keyboard, we will be slow. What do you think about that part?
it's
I
not
know
true.
your answer, but
My experience is that it's just not true. Is that
yeah.
if anything, the mob works faster, because a lot of the things that you have to do when you're working independently slow you down a lot, right? You have dependencies on other people, so you've got to wait for them to be able to talk to you. There are questions that aren't getting answered immediately. There's extra process that's involved in being able to work independently. There is overhead in the handoff. There's overhead in just passing along knowledge about what you're doing. It's just a mess. Right.
Hmm.
It takes a lot. If you scatter, Tim Ottinger talks about scatter gather, where you take a story and you break it up into tasks and scatter them out in the team, and then try and gather everything together in order to form an application. That gathering process is very time consuming, right? That integration process is very time consuming. So there's a lot of things in working solo that slow you down, and those don't exist in a mob. So the ensemble, or I should say ensemble, is everybody's calling it ensemble programming now. But and Woody's been using Amy Edmondson's term teaming, which is also a sort of a good way to look at it, because it's the whole team working together as a team, and you eliminate all that overhead. It's all gone.
Mhm.
And that often speeds you up by a factor of 2 or 3, just eliminating that overhead. And the other issue is that when you're working in an ensemble, people
Mhm.
imagine that it's one person working while 4 people look at them, right? Watch them
Mhm.
work. And in fact, it's the opposite of that. It's 4 people working while one person effectively takes notes in code.
Mhm.
And you rotate every 5 to 10 minutes. And because of that, everybody gets a chance to work, right? And everybody gets a chance to type. And
Mhm.
everything goes through the hands of the typist. So there's at least 2 important, everybody's involved in checking the stuff as it rolls out. You don't need code reviews because it's being reviewed as you're working. It's just faster. Everything about it works better. And I people who do it understand that, but people who don't do it usually don't. So it's important to do it. Just try it. Learn as much as you can before you start, right? Because it probably isn't what you think it is.
Mhm.
And then, at minimum, read Woody Zull's book, which he's now calling Teaming, it's available on Amazon. And try it. Give it a try. And if you have a coach, if you can bring in a coach to help,
Mhm.
that works a little bit better because there are a bunch of common mistakes that people make, common anti-patterns. And if you have somebody on site who's or working remotely with you, but somebody who understands those and is looking out for them, you
Mhm.
can you can be successful faster
Mhm.
because you have somebody who's saying, well, what you're doing now is the runaway driver anti-pattern, and let's correct it like this. And it's kind of helpful to have somebody watching who knows what they're doing.
Oh, okay. And also, we need to focus the whole value stream. I think that's very, very important point. That's very critical point to handbags, handoffs, processes to
Yeah,
eliminate them.
yeah.
And we have 3 different questions, again, coming from our participants. One of them, yeah, some people are now asking Scrum Master with domain knowledge. What's your thoughts?
I think everybody should have domain knowledge.
Ah, yeah.
Is that the why isn't the team talking to the customers? They should be, the whole team. And that includes, if you're doing Scrum, that of course includes the Scrum Master. It's part of that not wanting to have critical people, right? You want to be able to, nobody should be critical. So everybody needs to know about the domain in order to do the work. I should add to that another class I teach is a class on incremental architecture, which is, guys, so again, put on my shameless promotion hat, is coming up at the end of January, beginning of February. But if you are trying to build an agile friendly architecture, and you must have one, right? One of the reasons that organizations fail is they're fighting their code too much. They have an architecture that's not agile friendly, and every change is hard, and it's too hard. So
Mhm.
they can't move fast enough in the sense of getting feedback into the customer's hands because it takes too long to make even small changes.
Exactly.
So you can't can't fight your code, and that often involves an architecture change. So you have to design architecture in a way that works. But the the best approach to agile friendly architecture that I know is a domain driven approach. And
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be doing formal domain driven design, but you at least have to be domain focused. And the architecture, when you look at it, models the domain quite closely. So if everybody doesn't do the domain, you can't do that, right? As you make architectural decisions every minute as you're typing, as you're coding. And if the architecture is structured around the domain, if you don't know the domain, you can't make the right decision. So it's essential for
Mhm.
everybody who's doing the work to understand the domain because it affects the code. It affects the structure of the code. And so it's not to try and concentrate that knowledge in the product owner. That's a big mistake. Is that everybody needs to know how the domain works.
Okay, and the other question is about what does agile office mean for management? Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what an agile office is.
Yeah.
Right? If we talk about an agile organization overall,
Mhm.
the teams are self-organizing, so you have no managers at the team level. The idea of a project manager per team just disappears. That's gone.
Mhm.
You do need some management at the coordination level. Somebody's got to be coordinating the teams, making
Mhm.
sure that they're all on track. But that's not a ordering the teams around role. That's
Mhm.
a walking down to the teams, looking at what they're doing, and then providing some input along the lines of, well, this isn't really furthering our business strategy. And if you did this instead of that, it would work much better with what the teams are doing, what the other teams are doing, right? It's a way to disseminate information through the organization. So if you have managers at the coordination level that are used to coming up with plans and ordering people around, that's not going to work either. So you need fewer managers because you don't need the team level ones. You need fewer middle managers because they're, again, not ordering people around and forcing people to stay on schedule and all that kind of stuff. You can't stay on schedule in an agile world because the nature of the work changes all the time, right? Is that you're constantly learning new stuff. So what good is a schedule if the thing that you've scheduled is changing constantly? And so the people working at that middle level are not really managers in the traditional sense. You can call them that, I suppose, but the job that they're doing is a different job. It's a coordination job and a support job, not a ordering people around job. So it means a lot, right? The nature of management changes, and the number of managers go way down. Now, the one of the things to bear in mind, though, is that if you're doing a very slow quote transformation. One of the reasons it is typically moving that slowly is that the managers in the middle are going to lose their jobs if you succeed at programming, succeed at transforming. They know that. So they're doing everything they possibly can to prevent the transformation from happening. And it's not going to work.
Yeah, what can we do in that part? I know they will directly resist to transformation.
There are two approaches. One is to teach them to be agile. The one of them is to say, and if you don't want to work like that, not you're fired, but we'll help you find another job. So keep them on the payroll, right? Is don't put their families at risk by saying we're going to just fire you because you won't play along. Is help them find another job. And if you can't find another job for them, then find something for them to do inside the organization other than traditional management. There are people that will leave because they just hate the whole thing and they won't have anything to do with it, and that's fine. A couple of companies have done huge transformations where they just sort of laid down the law. They said, "This is what we're going to do from here on out, and if you're not with the program, go." Toyota did that when it introduced the Toyota production system back in the 70s. More recently, ANZ Bank rather in Australia did that. And it was a huge problem for them, but it was important enough that they pulled it off, right? Because legally there's some issues with just firing a bunch of people. You can't, legally you can't do it in a lot of countries. So they had to figure out a way to do it within the law, which involved, severance payments and all of that kind of stuff. But they did do it. Basically they said, this is what we're doing from here on out, and if you don't like it, you got to go. And but it can be done more gradually and more humanely. Starting out with education, but at that point it becomes critical for the upper management to be looking at the people that are in the middle, directly beneath them, and making sure that they're with the program, that they're doing the right things, right? And having to long, hard talks with them if they're not, right? Is that because habits are hard to break, and I'm not blaming anybody here. I'm just saying that when people think there's only one way to do things and suddenly you're giving them a radically different way, it seems wrong to them. And they think that this new way of doing things is wrong, so I can do my job better if we do it in the old way. And there's a classic example of that is in the Northridge earthquake, what 20 years ago now in Los Angeles. Several of the steel girder buildings failed. And so they were, that was a big deal because the whole idea of using steel in an earthquake prone area is that the steel buildings are not going to fail. So what went on? And what went on is really interesting is they were using a kind of steel that required a very specific welding process in order to make a strong weld. And that welding process was not the traditional welding process. And what happened is the welders, some of which had been welders for 30 years, looked at that and they said, that's just wrong. That's not going to work. And they welded it in the way that they have been working for 30 years because that was the best way to do their job. They were not cutting corners or anything. They thought they were doing the job in the best possible way. But that was not the way that the manufacturer recommended. So those welds failed and the buildings collapsed. And you see the same thing in an agile company that's changing, right? Is that they're not evil. It's just that they don't really understand the new way of working, and they think that the old way is better. So they're trying. They think they're doing a great job by pulling people back to the old way, and you've got to somehow convince them that that's not a good job. And that comes with training and lots of conversation and talking to people. But it's doable. But they will have to find other things to do, a lot of them. But that's not sometimes a problem. A lot of the team level managers used to be engineers, and they'd actually be happy to go back to being an engineer if they don't have to take a pay cut to do it. So do that, right? Is that there's often something for them to do.
Okay, and also as I see lots of companies, yes, choosing the first one, teach them, but they are spending most of time. This training is not working. The other training not working. The other training, also training programs, long life training programs, executive training programs, but end of all,
if training means sitting down and watching some guy drone on in front of a bunch of slides for a day, it's not going to work. Right? Is more and more I don't use slides when I'm doing training. I just have conversations with people. And the only times I use slides is if I'm doing an architecture class or something and I need to show people pictures of what I'm talking about. And a lot of people don't do training like that. There's lots of bad trainers out there in the world. And the other part of it is that if you're really going to learn something, you have to follow up the training immediately with doing. And one of the issues that I have is that I find that it's very hard for me to sell a training plus a week of me just hanging out helping job. So people think that second part is unnecessary. And so they'll hire me to come in and do the class, but then I leave. And, me being me, I'm always happy to answer questions afterwards if somebody sends me an email or something. But a lot of trainers don't do that, right? Is that they say, well, if I'm going to answer questions, you've got to pay me. Right. And I'm happy to answer questions, but even answering questions is not as good as having somebody on site. Even if they spend an entire week doing nothing but watching and saying, well, your guys are doing it great. That's really good information to have, right? Is that and if you don't have that feedback, you don't know. So I think it's important to follow up all training with sometime, at least, with somebody who knows what they're doing, checking in and helping with course corrections. And sometimes that could be a solid week or two working with the company. I've worked with some companies for as long as 8-9 months. But it can also be just coming in occasionally, once a week for a month, just to kind of see what everybody's doing and making some suggestions. If you're doing Scrum, I would certainly have somebody sitting in on all your ceremonies, all your events. Well, events is what they call them now, and making sure that things are flowing well in those events, right? Is that make sure the retros are working properly and that kind of thing. But you need both. Right. For training to work, in other words, you always have to immediately reinforce the training with actually using the thing that you have just learned. So if training means we're going to bring in this person and he's going to do a bunch of training and then maybe in a month or two we'll do it, that's never going to work.
Yeah. And the last two questions. I know you have training after the session, and again, thank you to accept my invitation. Last two questions. One of them is coming from our participants. The other last question, I will ask the last question. Okay, what of organizations do you think flexible enough to become an agile company? Traders or etc. or production?
All of them. Again, agility is a state of mind. It says I'm going to welcome change and I'm going to be open to making changes when they're necessary. And it's got nothing to do doing Scrum or stuff, right? Some of the Scrum won't work for some of this stuff, but Scrum is not Agile. They're not the same thing. The most Agile companies I know do not do Scrum. So often they started out doing Scrum and they've evolved past it. Scrum is not training wheels, right? You don't learn to ride a bicycle until you take the training wheels off. So you don't really become Agile until you stop doing Scrum, but at least it's a way to get people to start. But Scrum is not, in spite of what Jeff Sutherland says, Scrum is not the perfect process that you can apply to everything, right? That's just another way to sell his consulting services and his tickets. or not his tickets, his certificates. And, so agility, again, is a state of mind. And from my point of view, any way you achieve that is good. And certainly me, right? I'm a software guy, so I couldn't come in as a consultant and work with some of these companies because I don't know enough about the domain to be able to do that. But so you need, but as long as you're focusing on being flexible, I don't see how you cannot be agile by the time you're done. You can learn. I had a job once with a trading company it was an investment bank actually, and they wanted me to write some software for the traders to use, and they put me through their training program for day traders, or not day traders, for people that worked on the trading floor. And it was a 2-week program that all of the new hires went through, and I went through it too. So by the time I was done with that, I at least knew as much as the new hires did. I wasn't an expert by any means, but I knew the basics. And without that, I couldn't have done the work. I couldn't have done the job. So there's nothing wrong with learning as part of the process. And if somebody is good at software and you want to bring them in to help with the organization as a whole, well, first of all, you need to weed out the people that just think that you can become agile by installing some rigid processes. Those people are not going to be helpful. But there's plenty of people that don't take that approach. So the next thing you have to do is spend some time and spend some money in making sure they really understand what you're doing and how the organization works and that kind of thing. And then you can be helpful. And so, it can work. But again, when I say agile, I don't mean the thing that people often think when they say it. I'm talking about actual agility. I was putting flexibility and the ability to change direction quickly and the ability to accommodate new needs of the user that you've just discovered yesterday into the system that you're writing right now. And as I said back at the beginning, any way you do that is fine with me. As long as you can get the agility, that's fine. So.
Okay, the last question, Alan. This is my classical question, end of each session. Yeah, what advice do you have for people and companies? 3 advice, just 3. I'm limiting it because
yeah, I know you put me on the spot here. There's so much, but certainly I think you should work as small as possible. So that's the first thing. If you're using user stories, no user story should take longer than 2 days to implement. And even 2 days is pushing it a little bit. So work as small as possible so that you can get something into your customers' hands as quickly as possible so you can get feedback and make changes when it's still easy. Because if it takes too long to get code into the customer's hands, that's the key metric, right? So full lead time, not how long does it take to build the software, but how long does it take to get it into their hands? Because you've got to get that feedback, and the more delays you have, the more expensive it is to do the change, to make the changes, to the point where sometimes people don't make the changes because they're too expensive.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing: work as small as possible. The second thing is, I strongly believe that software development is primarily a social activity. And yes, you need technical skills to do it, but in order to do a good job at software, the continuous conversations you have are critical and are essential part of the process. And you have to converse with each other, of course. The teams have to converse with other teams. All of the teams have to converse with actual customers. The teams have to converse with business people. But there's a lot of conversation there. So the ability to talk to other people is essential. The conversation is constant, and the more conversation you have, often the better. Because again, you will be building the right thing if you have the right conversations. And I guess the third thing I'll throw in, which is related, is forget about getting it right the first time. Is that because usually nobody knows what right is until you build it and get it into people's hands and look at it. And I've been in many meetings where the team is arguing over something for hours, days sometimes. And there's lots of acrimony and people yelling at each other and pounding of tables and that kind of stuff. And it's because neither of the things that people are arguing up for are obviously right to everybody else. And so if nobody's right, what do you do? Right? Just start off with the assumption that nobody's right. And then what do? And you form an experiment. You try it. Flip a coin. Just pick one. right? And then try it and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, try something else. We've got to be agile here. And
Yeah.
this desire to get things right up front causes a lot of damage. It makes for rigid plans that people can't deviate from. It makes for these insane quarterly roadmaps that are lists of things to do. It makes for all of these arguments and planning about the right approach to something when you don't know. It's just give up on all that. Just maybe this is a Zen thing, but just kind of give up on being right. Is that it's not helpful, and instead think about experimenting. Everything's an experiment. Every story that you release is an experiment, and you collect data on that experiment by talking to your customers after you've released, and sitting down and watching them work. And every time they ask you a question, that's a failed experiment, right? Because the UX wasn't intuitive, and so on and so forth, right? Everything's an experiment, and that has to be applied organization wide. Right. Again, you can't have, if you have an organization that's doing quarterly roadmaps, that means that upper management is thinking in a waterfall. And you can't have upper management working in a waterfall while everybody else is trying to be agile. So they've got to have this experimental mindset also. So if you look at an agile organization, if they're doing roadmaps, they're entirely strategic roadmaps. They're saying, well, within the next 3 months, we want to move into this business area because we see that there's a market there that we're not satisfying. But they're not telling you how, right? That's up to the teams to figure out how. So the roadmaps are kind of, this is the direction in which we have to move in order to remain profitable. And you guys are smart. You people are smart. I shouldn't say guys. You folks are smart. So I'm not saying that speciously at all, actually. Is that it annoys me every time I use the word guys. I know how bad it is. It's a hard habit to break. But anyway, you folks are smart. You know what you're doing. So figure out how to make the strategy real. Right. And it's the team's job to do that. And but that's an experiment, right? What we're saying is upper management is willing to experiment. And
they
need the teams can succeed. And if they can't, then figure out how to make them be more successful. Bring in training, give them support that you're not giving them in certain ways. Talk to them about what kind of resources, not people, but things like software and so forth they need, and help them. So it's all about experimentation and not being right.
That's the first and third one. And many thanks, Alan. And that was great advice. And also, I want to say thank you, and again thank you to accept my invitation. And I took lots of notes, and also our participants now asked lots of questions. And again, thank you. And
you're welcome. And I'll throw in again in the sort of shameless promotion thing. I do have a mailing list, and sometimes I just do open sessions over Zoom where people can ask questions. And so if you're on the mailing list, you'll get notified of that and classes and so forth. If you go to holub.com, you'll find all of that. And upcoming classes are at holub.com/classes. And the mailing list is just holub.com/subscribe. And follow me on Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter. And
I know. I'm following.
But that's one of the best ways to get your questions answered, because if you ask me a question publicly, not through a DM, though I'm happy to talk on a DM, but if you ask your question publicly on Twitter, if I'm not around, there's usually many people who are around that can give you good answers. So Twitter is good for that, as long as you avoid the political stuff. I never bring up politics, or I try not to. You tend to not attract the trolls. And sort of little tech corner of Twitter is useful.
And also, I will share your Twitter account on the chat. And
okay, good.
Many thanks again, and see you, Alan. Have a good day, and have a good training for you.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
See you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.